First, I would like to mention MAYU Water. If you're trying to upgrade your hydration, MAYU uses a vortex flow system that mimics how water naturally moves in rivers and streams. That motion helps increase oxygenation and release unwanted gases like chlorine, improving overall water quality and making it easier to stay consistently hydrated. But here's what most people overlook. Hydration isn't just about water. It's about minerals and absorption. MAYU allows you to remineralize your water with essential minerals and electrolytes, supporting cellular hydration, energy levels, and overall physiological balance. When your water has the right structure and mineral content, your body can actually use it more efficiently. If you care about hydration, performance, or just feeling better day to day, this is one of those simple upgrades that adds up. You can get 10% off with the code Autism. Next, Daylight Computer Company and Daylight Kids. These devices are designed to work with your brain, not against it. And honestly, the future of tech is already here. Most screens are built for stimulation, bright, fast, and attention-grabbing. But that often leads to eye strain, mental fatigue, and disrupted sleep. Daylight takes a different approach. By reducing blue light and lowering your overall sensory load, these devices support sustained focus, calmer attention, and healthier sleep patterns. For anyone who feels drained after screen time, or for kids whose nervous systems are still developing, this creates a much more natural, regulated way to engage with technology. If you want your tech to support your brain instead of overstimulating it, this is worth checking out. Use code AUTISM for $50 off. And finally, Chroma light devices, lights designed for humans. Natural light contains a full spectrum that our brains and bodies are tuned to. But most modern indoor lighting falls short of that. It's often narrow, harsh, and out of sync with how we're designed to experience light. Chroma is built to bring that balance back. These lights are designed to better reflect the qualities of natural light, supporting your circadian rhythm, reducing sensory strain, and creating environments that feel calmer and more aligned. That can translate into better sleep, more stable energy, and a nervous system that isn't constantly being pushed toward overload. If you have ever felt off under certain lighting and didn't know why, this is worth exploring. Get 10% off with the code AUTISM. If you're optimizing your environment, your focus, your well-being, your nervous system, these products are worth checking out. There's something hidden in plain sight in the word autism. It comes from the Greek word autos, like automobile, automatic. And this means self. So the condition itself is named after the self. And yet many people who live with it are told, again and again, to move away from who they naturally are. That's not a small contradiction. It's a fundamental tension. It's a massive and harmful paradox. This isn't about claiming Jung described or diagnosed autism, because he did not. It's about noticing how his map of the psyche illuminates a modern tension. What happens when a mind is more anchored into its own internal structure than in the social persona the world demands? Because if autism is tied to the self, why does the world spend so much time trying to reshape it? Why are so many people fixated on how others orient? For today's episode, we're going to walk through that question using the work of Carl Jung, who believed that the central task of life is not fitting in, but becoming who you actually are. And what you'll start to see is this. Some people spend their entire lives trying to find the self. Others start closer to it. And we're told to leave it behind. Jung describes something called the persona. And at its basic level, it is simple. It's the version of you that exists in the social world. The way you are. The way you speak, respond, present yourself, and adapt to expectations. But Jung didn't see it as neutral. He said it directly. The persona is a compromise between the individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. He put it plainly. The persona is a certain complicated system of behavior which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by one's expectations or wishes. The danger he saw is when we forget it's a mask and mistake it for the whole self. Now pause on that word, compromise. Because a compromise always means something is being negotiated. And more importantly, something is being given up. And for who? For what? And at what cost? At first, the compromise is small. You adjust tone. You adjust timing. You learn how to respond in ways that are expected. And for most people, this becomes automatic. Social norms form and persist. Are you living your life or playing a role? They don't experience it as a compromise anymore. It just feels like, this is who I am. But Jung's point is that this is not the full self. It's a layer, a functional layer. And the more a person relies on that layer, the more distance can develop between how they operate internally and how they present externally. Now here's where this becomes very important, because most people are shaped heavily by this process. They learn the rules. They internalize them. They become fluent in them. But what happens if that shaping process doesn't occur in the same way? Not absent, but different. If attention is not primarily pulled toward social imitation, emotional mirroring, rapid interpersonal feedback, then something else becomes primary. Structure, consistency, internal logic, pattern. So instead of becoming deeply aligned with the persona, there is often a stronger alignment with the underlying system. And now the tension shows up because the world still expects the persona. It still expects timing, signaling, conformity to shared patterns. And when that alignment isn't there, the pressure increases. Not always directly, but consistently. And over time, that creates a very special kind of conflict. Not just, I'm different, but the way I naturally operate does not match what is being asked of me. And that's exactly the kind of split Jung was warning about. Jung made a critical distinction between the ego and the self. Who owns you is a fantastic question. The ego is what you're aware of, your identity, your sense of I. But the self is larger. This is about ego versus self. And he was very clear. The ego is not the center of the psyche. The self is. It includes the unconscious, the deeper organization structure of the psyche, the total system, not just the conscious part. The ego thinks it's in control, but Jung highlighted the ego is not the center of the psyche, the self is. Now consider how this plays out. In many people, the ego is heavily shaped by the persona. So identity becomes socially defined, externally reinforced, and dependent on that feedback. But if someone is less driven by that external shaping, then the ego may remain more influenced by internal structure. Not social identity, but internal organization. Maybe something autism provides, a comfort within the self. This can look like consistency over impression, accuracy over agreement, structure over social flow. And that becomes and creates friction. Because now the ego is not fully aligned with the social world. It's aligned with something deeper. When the ego listens more to the self than to society, conflict is inevitable. Conflict with the outside world. This isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's a different center of gravity. Jung believed the unconscious is not random. It is structured. It organizes information beneath awareness. It detects patterns before conscious thought ever catches up. He described intuition as perception through the unconscious. Modern research echoes this. Many autistic people show exceptional pattern recognition, detailed focused processing, and the ability to grasp complex systems quickly. Strengths long documented in studies of visual spatial thinking and systemizing. Remember the episode Autism and Intuition, and remember the episodes on sensory processing and sensation to perception. This is not guessing, not emotion, but direct recognition of underlying structure. Now think about what shows up in autism. Rapid pattern detection, noticing inconsistencies others miss, understanding systems without step-by-step instruction. That's not surface-level processing. That's engagement with the deep structure of information. You don't have to understand it for it to be true. You can recognize it when you're observing the autistic phenotype, but you don't have to understand it. This is happening. Many times, the autistic is blamed for something like not paying attention, or not catching on, or having to show work. This is all for the sake of that other person in the environment. It can feel like knowing something instantly, seeing the answers before the explanation. And that's not skipping steps. That's operating at a different level of organizing, a whole system of organization. Some minds don't think faster, they think deeper, closer to the structure itself. And when that happens, learning this doesn't speed up, it changes form. Jung introduced the idea of archetypes, not as characters, but as fundamental patterns of perception and meaning. And these are built into the psyche. They shape how we understand the world, organize experience, assign meaning. The mind is not just reacting to reality. It is structuring it. And those structures often appear as images, spatial relationships, symbolic patterns. Now, consider visual thinking. For many autistic individuals, thought is not primarily verbal. It is spatial, structural, and image-based. Of course, autism is a complete phenomenon. Not every autistic person thinks primarily in images or spatial structures, but for many, thought stays closer to the raw pattern and the archetype before it gets translated into the verbal, social shorthand that most people use. This is closer to how Jung described the psyche functionally at a deep level, before language simplifies it, before social systems standardize it. So instead of filtering everything into shared symbolic shortcuts, the system stays closer to raw representation, and that allows for precision. Remember the Autism and Intuition episode? I hate to have these comparison groups, but the autistic versus non-autistic, or the so-called typical. However you want to say that for a comparison group. The autistic has flooded in information of raw sensory processing, raw data that it can make sense of. But there's a give and take with that. It can become overwhelming sometimes. But the typical, that non-autistic, they generalize information to get a gist, and then they send that on. Whatever is relevant to them based off of their experience, their perception, their psyche. But it reduces compatibility with fast-paced social exchange. The closer you stay to the structure of reality, the harder it is to compress it into social form. Jung also talked about the shadow. Jung's shadow is not just darkness. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When society labels intensity, different rhythms, or unconventional focus as problems, those traits don't vanish. They go into the shadow. Jung warned that what we reject in ourselves, or what is rejected in us, returns in distorted form. The internal conflict many autistic people feel isn't always from the traits themselves, but from years of them being pushed away, manipulated, and attempted to be changed by others. But the shadow is not just internal. It's everything that gets rejected by the individual or by the environment. And what gets rejected is often not what's wrong, but what doesn't fit. In autism, this can include intensity, sensitivity, different rhythms of communication, and unconventional focus. If those traits are consistently treated as problems, they become sources of internal conflict. Not because they are harmful, not because they are misaligned with expectations. If anything, do you know about autism, or are you just trying to simplify what you are seeing, manipulating autism into your capacity to understand, to satisfy yourself? Are you manipulating it so it's comforting to you? Jung warned, what is denied does not disappear. It returns in another form. So when a system is forced away from its natural operation, it doesn't become more functional. It becomes more divided. The problem is not the trait. The problem is the rejection of the trait. For Jung, the goal is individuation, becoming who you actually are, not who you were shaped to be, not who fits best, but who you are at the deepest level. And he said something critical. The more a man is individualized, the more he becomes separated from the collective. It might be a good idea to spend some time on that. Repeat it. Understand it. The more a man is individualized, the more he becomes separated from the collective. That delta is costly and risky and rewarding simultaneously. Most people start far from that. They are deeply shaped by the persona, and their task is to move inward. Not inward with congruence. Inward with incongruence. Inward with internal conflict. You cannot persist with this. The good news is you will win eventually. The bad news is you defeat yourself. But if someone begins closer to internal alignment, the task changes. It becomes, how do I stay aligned with the self while engaging a world that isn't built for it? That's not a deficit. That's a different trajectory. And here's the paradox. The traits that create friction, the precision, the depth, the pattern recognition, internal consistency, are the same traits that drive innovation, discovery, and new systems of thought. So how does one protect the self in a world built for personas? Jung's path of individuation offers clues, honest self-reflection, honoring your natural rhythms where possible, choosing environments or relationships that don't demand constant performance, and using the persona consciously as a tool, not a prison. The trait that creates friction, the precision, depth, internal consistency, are often the same ones that fuel innovation and new ways of seeing. The world resists what it eventually depends on. So when we come back to autism and the self, we're left with something deeper than diagnosis. We're left with a question. What happens when someone is more anchored in the self than in the social structure around them? Jung believed most people spend their lives trying to return to that center. But when someone starts there, the challenge isn't finding it, it's protecting it. It's understanding it, especially from the outside world, and learning how to bring it into the world without losing it. The self is not something you create. It's something you either stay connected to or slowly lose. So I'll leave you with this. In what ways have you been asked to become someone else? And what might it look like to return more fully to your own center? If you're listening to the podcast, listening to the episode, please feel free to leave a review or rating. Podcasting, reviews, ratings, and downloads are huge, and I very much appreciate your feedback. You can contact me on X at RPS47586. You can email me info.fromthespectrum@gmail.com. You can also check out the YouTube page, where you can see full-length videos, shorts, and clips. If you're listening, thank you for listening to From the Spectrum podcast.